British weather. British people talk about it. Visitors to our shores are amazed by it, but the farmers are most affected by it. One day it's cold and damp, the next warm and dry. Good, bad, indifferent, the weather is part of the pattern of our existence and has helped to shape our character as a people and our way of life in country, town and village. Because of our weather, our soil and a score of other things, Britain is a land of small farms and mixed farming, a land of dairy and beef cattle, with fields of roots and other feed for man and beast. And corn, the king of crops, the crown of the year. But though the general pattern of our fields and farms may not have changed so much in the past 100 years or so, our whole method of working them has been revolutionized within the memory of our youngest men by the coming of the tractor and of mechanization. To those who still think and talk of old England, it may come as a surprise to learn that Britain is the most highly mechanized farming country in the world. Mixed farming and mechanization, that means large numbers of seasonal machines, costly machines when you consider they may be used at full stretch for only a few weeks in the year. The British farmer's investment in machinery, compared with his total investment in the holding, is probably higher than anywhere else in the world. And all this equipment has to put up with British weather. Unfortunately, but understandably, the number of machines has grown faster than the means of stabling them. Few farms have enough good buildings for all their seasonal equipment. Some of it's lucky and is housed well. Some of it finds a pretty good home in the corner of a barn. Some of it gets reasonable shelter from direct rain under the lean-to. But inevitably, a few implements are left to fend for themselves in a corner of the field where they were last used. A dilapidated open-sided building gives little protection against driving winds, general dampness, mist and fog, and weeks of rain. The whole year round, wet and fine, the weather plays havoc with the farmer's gear, rusting it, eating his money away. And when the season comes round again, there it lies, red with rust. But what can you do? Steel will rust, and you can't change the climate. Among the first and worst casualties, of course, are the manure spreaders. Helped on by the acids in the fertilizer, rust works quickly and bites deep, eating into the metal, jamming up the working parts as tight as a drum. But of course, there's always the optimist who neglects his machinery and then expects to find it in good working order just before harvest. Hi, Joe. Got a small job for you. And so, on to the junk pile goes another piece of gear that cost good money to buy and time and money to replace. Yes, But what can you do? Well, let's go right back to the start and look at the raw material from which farm equipment is made, iron ore. Here it is, being dug from the earth and taken away to be made into steel. Muddy, reddish-yellow color. Not unlike rust to look at, is it? And as a matter of fact, of course, it is rust, or something very like it. For iron ore is mainly iron oxide, and rust is iron that's been oxidized by uniting with oxygen from the air. Some metals combine very easily with oxygen from the air, and iron's one of them. Mild steel seems to have one idea in life, and that is to turn itself back as quickly as possible into something like its natural state. Tin is in no hurry to unite with oxygen. Not rusting easily, it makes excellent containers. Lead starts off with a rush, but soon gets tired of it. The first thin layer of lead oxide, lead rust you might call it, forms a seal, and the oxidizing seems to go no further. The metal remains bright just below the surface, which makes it useful for roofs and so on. But to come back to iron, let's see exactly what conditions make it rust most quickly and severely. You all recognize this, an ordinary mower blade. We'll take 5 of them and try them out under 5 different tests to see if we can find the real villain of the piece. We put one blade in a jar of air thoroughly dried by chemicals, air and nothing but air. Another in boiled distilled water so that no air touches the metal. A third is damped with water and left in air, a fourth soaked in salt water. The fifth damped in water and then sprinkled with artificial fertilizer. Now we'll let them have a rusting race. The camera is set to take one picture every minute for a day and a night. We shall see 24 hours of rusting packed into a minute and a half. They're off. We've marked them in colors so that you can follow the race. The runners are, bottom row, red, air without any water, blue, water without any air, pink, salt water spray, and on the top row, white, air, water and artificials all together, yellow, air and water together. And already you can see what's happening. Air by itself isn't the villain of the piece, nor is water by itself. The race is over. We see what's happened in 24 hours. White wins easily. The mower blade that was damped and sprinkled with artificials is deeply corroded. No wonder the manure spreader only lasts about 2 years if something isn't done about this worst form of rusting. Pink comes second. Salt water. Farmers along the coast know only too well the extra damage caused by salt spray and sea mist. And damp air, our ordinary weather, comes a good third. Evidently, then, the first answer to rust is to prevent air and water getting at steel both together. From the earliest times, men have tried to do just that. They smeared their battle axes with tallow. Animal fat was used on early farm tools. Waterproof paint came in and was used to protect non-working parts of machinery. Then came mineral jellies and greases and oil from the sun. All these methods succeeded up to a point, but only up to a point. If the surface was damp, then the fat or oil merely imprisoned the moisture, like this. Whereas what was really needed was something that swept the water away to start with, like this. A substance or a liquid that would first displace all water and then quickly form an airtight and watertight covering. As so often happens, war produced the answer. The research departments of one of the great oil companies were called upon to find a means of protecting vital military equipment which might have to wade through salt water and be fit for immediate action after landing on the beaches, and means also of preventing the rapid corrosion of equipment in the damp, sweltering heat of tropical battlefields, like the jungles of Burma. In the early stages, the laboratories were up against a formidable task. Investigations on corrosion resistance were carried out in various forms, and new test methods had to be developed to assess the water displacing properties of various fluids and compounds. Eventually a fluid was developed which had, first of all, the remarkable property of driving all moisture off a metal surface, and then quickly depositing a sort of skin, moisture-tight and airtight. The fluid is now known as NCIS 256. How it works is well shown by a simple test. Cotton wool, saturated with water but not dripping wet, is here immersed in a beaker of ordinary oil. Notice, nothing happens, no water comes out, but place a similar piece of saturated cotton wool in this other beaker containing NCIS 256 and see what happens. The NCIS fluid at once begins to displace the water. The drops of displaced water are now coming out in a continuous stream. Notice the pool of water at the bottom of the beaker. The drops will continue to fall until all the water has been displaced. We can see the effect even more clearly in this thinner glass container. Now let us see how NCIS 256 acts upon metal. This mild steel plate is first soaked with salt water. 1 drop of the fluid is allowed to fall on it. Watch how it begins to drive off the moisture. Take a similar plate and see what ordinary oil will do. Plop. And nothing happens. Back to the first plate. The dewatering fluid is still driving the water away. You can see the little wave moving to the extreme edge of the plate. Take a look at both these plates 2 hours later. The one on which the drop of oil fell has begun to rust. The other, with the water displacing fluid, has not. Now let us try a more practical test. 3 mould boards are placed side by side in the open air. The first is left alone. Ordinary grease is smeared on the second. The third is brushed over with NCIS dewatering fluid. They are left out in the open to weather for 3 weeks. And we look at them again. The one that had nothing done to it is red with rust. Cracks have appeared in the grease covering of the second, cracks which will gradually rust. The third has a smooth skin all over it. And under this protective skin, the mould board is clean and bright, just as it was 3 weeks before, as we can see after a wipe with a paraffin rag. These rust-preventing fluids are today available to the farmer, but he must study how to use them. Every day, farm equipment of one kind or another comes into yards like this for maintenance. Much of it has broken down because of rust. This manure spreader is rusted solid. The agitator would need a sledgehammer to move it. Fertilizer left on the teeth of the agitator, and here between the spindle and the bearing will cause the moving parts to bind up solid. That's why it's vital to drench the thing well with water. This man has a hose. He's lucky. But remember, there's no corner of a farm where you can't carry a few gallons of water if you take the trouble, and a bucket will do as well as a hose. Having removed the dirt, then apply the rust-preventing fluid. There's one thing to remember. The fluid is not a magic wand to be waved over the manure spreader. It will remove water, but not acid crystals. You must use water first to give it a chance. Here we actually see the fluid driving off the water, getting next to the metal and floating the water off on the top. Then it seals it off from any further moisture by leaving a protective skin on the working parts. If you have this model, wash all the artificials off the rods and see that the ensis penetrates into the bearings. The shutter type gets choked up quickly unless it's washed regularly and then sprayed with the fluid. The reaper and binder has fairly complicated machinery, which is vulnerable to rust. Remember the optimist and his binder. Too often it requires new working parts each season, especially the knotter mechanism. The tension on the twine must be the same throughout, so the eyelets must be kept free from rust, otherwise the knotter can't do its work. Here's another useful job for ensis. At the end of each season, treat all the working parts thoroughly, dabbing plenty of the fluid all over. To show the method, the knotter has been removed here, but there's no need to do this in practice. Pay special attention to the jaw. Rust damages the delicate mechanism if left in damp air. There's no acid to get rid of here, so there's no need for water. And the mower also needs protecting before it's put away. Brush the fingers liberally, taking care to get the brush into the crevices. Sap rusts the blade as much as rain, and unless the moisture is first driven off with the dewatering fluid, it will rust while it's in storage. Both the fingers and the blade should then be given an added protective by smearing them over with the special compound which forms a thick seal over the metal. Mechanics will find the dewatering fluid very useful too for preventing nuts and bolts and tools from going rusty. Those who possess a combine harvester really need a garage in which to house it during the winter months, but that's not practicable for the average farmer. Yet, providing he sprays the parts which are liable to rust, such as the drum, metal sheet and the grader, his machinery won't rust even though it has to be stored in a barn. Brand new equipment often lies out in the open for days awaiting dispatch to the farm. If there's a spell of bad weather, the equipment will get rusty before it ever reaches the farm. These new fluids will help to protect it. Rust. Is it just one of those things that must be endured like taxes or the common cold? Not entirely. Of course it would be impossible to banish rust altogether from the farm, short of making every tractor and implement of materials that had no wish to oxidize. But science has at least put within the farmer's reach the means of protecting his most costly and vital seasonal equipment. The new dewatering and protective fluids that have been developed from petroleum will help, if they're given a chance. They're not magic wands. They need using with common sense and care. On those terms, they do their work well, and they can help the farmer to overcome at least a part of a problem that has cost him money and worry for a long, long time.